All right, let's get right into it. Have you ever wondered why we're taught about money like it's a math problem? Formulas, spreadsheets, calculating interest. But in the real world, money actually behaves a whole lot more like human psychology. We spend our entire lives chasing wealth, thinking it's all about sheer intelligence. But if we actually peel back the layers, what we find is just so much more deeply human. So, today we're going to explore the profoundly emotional, highly irrational, and honestly, utterly fascinating ways our minds interact with money. Now look at this idea. Doing well with money has a little to do with how smart you are and a lot to do with how you behave. What's really interesting here is that it introduces the central paradox we're looking at today. We all kind of assume, right, that financial success is strictly reserved for the geniuses, the math prodigies, the Wall Street analysts, but the truth? It's literally not about intelligence at all. It is entirely about emotional control. I mean, your brain can be absolutely brilliant, but if your ego is completely out of check, you're headed for disaster. This contrast right here just brilliantly illustrates that exact point. On one side, we've got the educated, high-powered executive, the kind of guy who took massive risks, completely lost control of his emotions, and eventually went bankrupt. And then, on the exact opposite side, we have a humble janitor, someone who quietly swept floors, lived patiently, and died a multimillionaire. It just perfectly proves that ordinary people with zero formal financial education can build incredible wealth simply by mastering their own behavior. Meanwhile, a genius who loses control can lose absolutely everything. Section 1. Why we do crazy things and your personal lens on money. Let's explore the deep emotional scars from our past that completely control our financial behaviors. You see, a poor person and a rich person make very different decisions, and neither of them is actually crazy. They're really just looking at the world through a completely different lens. Think about it. Your personal life experiences make up what, maybe a microscopic fraction of a percent of what has actually happened in the world? Yet those tiny, highly specific experiences dictate 80% of how you think the entire world works. If you grew up in poverty, you might hoard cash out of this deep, primal fear of running out. If you grew up rich, well, you might blindly take massive risks because you've never truly felt that fear. We also really have to acknowledge that luck and risk are siblings. We desperately want to believe that all success is purely the result of hard work, right? But let's look at Bill Gates for a second. Yes, obviously he's a brilliant guy, but he also just happened to go to one of the only high schools in the entire world that actually had a computer at the time. Not every success is pure skill, and frankly, not every failure is laziness. So much of our lives is guided by forces we simply cannot control. And honestly, understanding this brings a profound emotional relief. It strips away that toxic burden of constantly comparing ourselves to others. So the takeaway here, never fully worship success and never fully blame failure. Section 2, the trap of never enough, greed, ego, and the moving goalpost. Moving into the darker side of our minds here, let's look at why we are so easily destroyed by greed. There's this famous interaction between the authors Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller at a billionaire's party, and it reveals such a profound truth. Vonnegut basically points out that their billionaire host made more money in a single day than Heller's massively famous novel made in its entire history. And Heller's response? Yes, but I have something he will never have. Enough. Man, enough is arguably the most powerful and dangerous word in personal finance, because without it, that goalpost, it just keeps moving. Take the tragic real-life story of Rajat Gupta. Here's a guy who was an orphan, right? And he built a staggering $100 million fortune. By every possible measure, he had won the game. But his ego just couldn't handle simply being a multimillionaire. He desperately, deeply wanted to be a billionaire. So he risked everything he had and everything he actually needed for money he didn't have and didn't even need. It was a purely emotional failure. He ended up destroying his life, his freedom, his entire legacy, all just to feed an emotional illusion. So the crucial point we need to wrap our heads around is that making money and keeping money require completely opposite psychological mindsets. Getting rich, that requires you to be bold, to take risks, to be relentlessly optimistic. But staying rich, actually keeping it, that requires humility. It requires patience and honestly a healthy dose of paranoia. It taps into this primal survival instinct, the awareness that everything you have could literally be taken away in a single second. To put some numbers to this, it is genuinely terrifying to realize that 40% of successful, publicly traded companies eventually lose effectively all their value over time. Think about that. They were absolutely brilliant enough to succeed in the beginning, but they lacked the emotional discipline to actually survive the long game. It just proves that long-term survival is a much, much greater superpower than sheer brilliance. Bottom line, you have to survive to succeed. Section 3. The silent superpower: time, patience, and compounding. Now let's transition over to the invisible mechanics of real wealth, where time becomes the ultimate test. To put the staggering magic of time into perspective, out of Warren Buffett's immense net worth, roughly $75 billion came strictly after his 65th birthday. Let that sink in for a second. $75 billion. He isn't just the greatest investor, he is the greatest long-term investor. The real secret to his unbelievable wealth wasn't just picking the perfect stocks, it was quietly, patiently doing so for over 3/4 of a century. It's wild. The thing is, compounding is so counterintuitive because our brains naturally crave quick action. We want the secret trading strategy, the fast hack, the exciting move that changes everything overnight. But real wealth is actually just small, incredibly boring actions repeated silently over decades. The absolute hardest financial skill isn't doing the complex math. It's mastering your own boredom, staying completely quiet, and just letting compounding do the heavy lifting. Section 4. Wealth is what you don't see. The man in the car paradox. This explores how modern society forces us to look rich instead of actually becoming rich. Here's the wild truth. True wealth is completely invisible to the eye. It's the first-class upgrade you declined. It's the expensive watch you didn't buy, and the flashy car you walked away from at the dealership. We're so conditioned to judge people's financial success by what we can see, their Instagram feeds or what's parked in their driveway. But actual wealth, it's the unspent money and the unseen options sitting quietly in a bank account. We desperately need to separate the idea of being rich from being wealthy. Being rich really just means you have a high current income and you spend it on highly visible things to show it off. But being wealthy, that means having hidden savings. It means having future options, flexibility, and security. Spending money just to show people how much money you have is quite literally the absolute fastest way to go broke. Which brings us to the psychological tragedy known as the man in the car paradox. When you see someone driving down the street in a brand new Ferrari, you almost never look at them and think, wow, that guy driving is so cool. Instead, you immediately imagine yourself in that driver's seat, thinking about how cool other people would think you are. We buy luxury items fully believing they'll bring us respect and admiration. But the onlookers? They only use our stuff to imagine their own glory. Ultimately, nobody is as impressed by your stuff as you are. So, how does this build into our everyday decisions? Well, you are a deeply emotional human being, not a spreadsheet. Aiming to be mostly reasonable works so much better than trying to be coldly, mathematically rational. A perfectly rational financial plan might look incredible on paper, but a reasonable strategy, one that you can actually stick with even when you're terrified and the stock market is crashing, will win out every single time. Section 5. The ultimate dividend is freedom, buying time and peace. Let's arrive at the ultimate philosophical truth here and uncover the actual purpose behind all of this. The highest possible dividend that money can ever pay you isn't a sprawling mansion. It isn't a fleet of luxury cars, and it definitely isn't elevated social status. It is complete, unadulterated autonomy over your own time. True freedom is waking up in the morning and genuinely being able to say, I can do whatever I want today. It's having the peace of mind to truly own your day and the profound, life-changing ability to finally say no. When we distill this entire psychological journey down, we can clearly see what actually matters. Time is your greatest asset. Survival always beats brilliance. Building wealth is fundamentally about shrinking your ego, practicing extreme humility, and saving for absolutely no specific reason other than buying your future freedom. You have to define what enough means for you, leave a massive margin of error in your life, and just let time do its thing. Freedom is true wealth. And consequently, the biggest financial mistakes people make, they have nothing to do with bad math or picking the wrong stock. They are purely driven by emotional reactions. It's the fear of missing out. It's the desperate, ego-driven need to impress strangers who aren't even paying attention to you. It's constantly moving the goalpost, risking what you have for what you don't need, and constantly interrupting the quiet magic of compounding just because you got a little bored or scared. As we strip away all the illusions of finance, we're left with this one profound truth. Real wealth isn't a massive flashing number on a bank screen. It's the quiet peace of mind in the evening. It's the uninterrupted, stress-free time spent with your family. It is the deeply human freedom to walk away from toxicity and live entirely on your own terms. That is the true psychology of your money. I want to leave you with this final, genuinely life-changing thought to challenge your own financial ego. Spending money to show people how much money you have is the fastest way to have less money. So I want you to ask yourself right now and be really honest. Are you spending your precious, limited life trying to look wealthy to others? Or are you quietly, patiently building the invisible freedom to finally live for yourself?